Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Tristan sent me notes, and Steve, check out this story from OutdoorLife.com. Trail runner stopped in Utah for not having a hunting or fishing license. Wasn't hunting, wasn't fishing, was running, but it turns out that now in some places you got to have a license to hunt or fish while running. Does that make sense? Well, it sort of does, but we'll get to there. A new law requires hikers, bikers, and other outdoor users to help fund some of the state's wildlife management areas alongside hunters and anglers. And for the time being, they just said, hey, how about this? Just buy a hunting license or buy a fishing license. So Chris Milgate wrote the story for OutdoorLife.com. A resident of Utah who spends a lot of time outdoors says that he spends time out there, but he's not hunting or fishing. But he does do outdoor fitness. He's a hardcore trail runner. So recently, he was stopped by a game warden on state land about an hour south of Salt Lake City. The officer told him that since he didn't have a valid hunting or fishing license on him, he was breaking the law by trail running. And he said in a video on Instagram, I just got stopped by wildlife management running the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, which is part of a wildlife management area. Guess I got to go buy a fishing permit to run the trails. The new state law took effect in May. It requires anyone over the age of 18 to have a valid hunting or fishing license to access the wildlife management areas in Utah's four most populated counties. The four counties are located along the Wasatch Front. I could be mispronouncing it. I probably am. Where roughly 80% of the state's population lives. The hundreds of comments and replies to his video range from applause to disdain. The comments also speak to a larger debate around the conservation of public areas and natural resources and who should foot the bills. And, here's the thing. I mountain bike. I've mentioned that before. And I've mountain biked quite a bit at various places like Pontiac Lake State Park. And to mountain bike there, theoretically, you could ride your bicycle into the park, I believe, without paying for anything. And then just ride your bike around inside the park and then leave. But if you drive into the park, that you got to pay to get your vehicle into the park, regardless of what you're doing in there. Going to the beach, you got to pay to get in. Going out in the woods to hike, got to pay to get in. And so I actually have bought the state park pass. And it actually is a designation on the little sticker that goes in your license plate. So that my vehicle's got that on there. So if I decide to go to a state park, I can just go and say, I've got the pass. They wave me through. But I am paying to be in the park. And so this is an interesting angle there where they're saying, well, you got to buy a hunting or fishing permit because those are the only two things that we do to raise money out there. So a lot of people are just looking at this as them having to pay more money to access public property, when in all reality, these are very different public lands, says a Utah spokesperson. These lands are specifically for wildlife and hunting and fishing, and they're specifically purchased with hunting and fishing dollars. So I can't speak to that, because the state park I'm talking about is a state park used for all kinds of recreational purposes. I mean, there's a lake there with boats on it, and people swimming, and a beach, and volleyball courts. Okay, so a representative from Utah who sponsored the bill that is now law says the crux of the issue isn't losing access to public lands, as many users who don't hunt and fish have claimed. It's recognizing what certain lands are designated for. And they're saying, look, this stuff actually was purchased and is being preserved for the purposes of hunting and fishing. But, in that case, do you really say, no running on the trails? It seems to me they should have some way to allow you to do that. And I can tell you that at Pontiac Lake, where I've done all the mountain biking, I've also run the trails many times. And it's one of the most difficult trail runs that I'm familiar with. It's about a 10-mile loop, maybe 9 or 10-mile loop, but it's got a lot of this on the trail. And it's a grinder. It's difficult. But I can tell you, I have a brother who is an ultra-marathon runner. He's run several races over 100 miles in length. He ran a race down in Louisiana that was 126.2 miles long. And for those of you who caught that, yes, it's 100 miles and a full marathon in length. And he's also run some other ones, hundreds of miles. And these guys who do this ultra running go out and log mileage the way you or I drive our cars. And you got to get outdoors and do that. Now, you could do that on roads, dealing with traffic and traffic control devices and all kinds of stuff like that. But it's easier if you can find a place out in the middle of nowhere where you can run a 20-mile loop or a 30-mile loop or something like that. And those are usually going to be places that overlap with hunting and fishing places. And the interesting thing is that no one's claiming that there's a conflict between the ultra runners and the hunters and the fisher people. It's just the fact that they're saying, look, that's what this stuff is being used for. Therefore, you have to help us maintain it for that purpose. But I wonder if they couldn't just say, we're going to have another permit type pass that allows you to run out here. Because I'd have to imagine that if you were to measure the impact that people have on the land through use, that hunting and fishing is slightly more impactful on the land than someone simply running on it. Now, I've had people who argued with me about this because I've discussed this matter with them before. Because out at Pontiac Lake, for instance, you've got people on mountain bikes, you've got people running, and here's where it gets interesting, you've got people on horseback. And now the trails are used by all three groups of people. And the people on the bicycles, occasionally you'll see stuff that fell off a bicycle or was dropped or thrown off a bicycle. And that's not good. You shouldn't litter out in the woods. I've also seen stuff that runners have dropped or thrown out there as well. Not a lot, but you see it. However, you will see wear in the trails, W-E-A-R, wear, where horse hooves have chopped out holes in dirt that was a little bit wet or mucky or whatever. And I've also seen these large deposits that the horses leave on the trail. And one thing I've learned, and I by the way, I love horses. I absolutely love horses. They're stately animals. I love horses. And the one thing about horses is that they do their business wherever they are. They aren't shy about where they do their business. And they can actually do their business while they're just walking along doing their business. And I've been on the trail before on my mountain bike, and there's a couple of horseback riders on the trail, and we got to get around them somehow, and we do our best to go around without spooking anybody. But occasionally, I've also come around the curve, and there's a big old deposit left by a horse. Now, I'm not complaining. I'm simply pointing out that different users of these resources have different impacts on them. And so if it costs money to maintain these resources, you should look at who's using the resources and how much are they using. Because somebody who goes in and simply runs across it and leaves isn't really wearing it out, unless you're legitimately saying, well, we are trying to limit the number of people out there. We're trying to choke it off somehow. I suppose that could be an argument, but I don't ever see anybody raise that argument. But hunting and fishing, you know, they have to have game wardens to go out and follow around and make sure that people are following the rules on that. And I assume that there's a cost associated with that because you got salaries of game wardens. I've seen reality TV shows about game wardens here in Michigan, of all places. We got game. So it's an interesting angle. But I think they would have done themselves a better service if they had said, instead of a fishing permit or a hunting license to go run on the trail, you got to have some kind of pass that allows you to go out there and indicates that you pitched in. Because most people I know who run or bike, and I'm guessing the ones who ride their horses out there, wouldn't mind contributing a couple bucks. Because like I said, I already have. I've got the park pass on 3 of my vehicles. And it's specifically so if I decide like throwing my bike in my car and going for a mountain bike ride out of Pontiac Lake, I can do that. And there are other parks, by the way. It's not just Pontiac Lake. If you're a mountain biker in southeast Michigan or near southeast Michigan, look up Potawatomi. And it's an amazing trail system. It's southwest of Pontiac Lake a bit, over towards Pinckney and Hell, I kid you not. And that is actually, in my mind, the best mountain biking trail in lower Michigan. It's like going to an amusement park, except you're doing all the work. But it's another story. The point here is that you got to buy a permit or a license to run on these trails in Utah, but it's a hunting or fishing license, despite the fact you ain't hunting or fishing. And they're not accusing you of it either. They're just saying you got to pitch in, and that's the way they've chosen to do it. So I guess it's not great public relations, but it makes sense. So Tristan, thanks for the story. OutdoorLife.com ran it. Chris Milgate wrote it. Trail runners stopped in Utah for not having a hunting or a fishing license, which you apparently need now. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Not a girl, not a person, not a robot.